Hi everyone, and thanks for tuning in to my talk today. I talk about thinking, and I do hope that it will give you some new thoughts around thinking at the end of it. The reason that we're here today is because last year, as it did for many, life changed quite dramatically, and well, I think it made a lot of us think. And then we moved into also remote work, and that made me start to think around how we work together and how we interact, communicate, innovate, and be creative together still, even in a remote setup, because it was quite different from what we were used to. I also took the chance to educate myself, so I became a coach, which in that sense then led me to think even more, especially around topics like how we listen and how we interact and how we engage in with listening, so to say. So that's kind of how we ended up here today. But before we go on, I would like to challenge you to not think. I know it's ironic, but I would like you to leave your email, add emails, your Slack messages, your ticket writing, your planning, your whatever for these 24 minutes that this talk is, and just listen. Pay full attention to whatever is happening here. And I would also like you to not try to figure out what I'm about to say next. It's not important. You don't have to figure that out. I'll take care of it. Just listen without assumptions. Worst case scenario, you had a 24-minute break where you didn't have to think and you can go back to your old routines afterwards. So no thinking for you. I've been working in product for quite some time now, a few years, and I come from a non-tech background. So I was always working with people, not product, and from sales to service to as a team lead for many years. I was working in HR with recruitment, so I've been very focused on people. And I think at the end of the day, I do work with people. And for me, the fun part about product management is for sure the people. And we have also this amazing, quite unique setup where we have this whole system in place where we have rituals and ceremonies that is supposed to bring us closer and more innovative and creative and aligned. So I think that we are really in a luxurious space when we're supposed to be thinking together. However, that's not always the case, is it? I mean, you've all seen the meme, this could have been an email. And this is unfortunately true. We do a lot of meetings where not everybody participates, when some are not even listening, or you come out of this was an update status quo meeting and you're uninspired, nothing new really happened, or you have these quick catch-ups where you gotta make quick decisions and all of these things. So we're not really aiming, we're not putting ourselves up for success here, so to say, in these meetings. And I think another part with this fast-paced kind of world that we're living in, these quick decisions that we think that we have to make all the time, we also, as product manager, end up with some sort of intuition pride, where we take pride in being fast thinkers. And I mean, I know I do, for sure. I'm like, I can think on my feet. Which is something that is, of course, really, really good. But I also started to realize that this fast thinking and this reactive thinking is not getting the best and most creative and new things out of me. It just kind of is what always happens. So this kind of reactive thinking is essentially putting out fires, not thinking beyond that first initial thought. It's really what is happening quite often in the world that we're living in right now. And I think it's important to try to figure out also how the brain works and how we do think so that we can actually enable better thinking. So how do we do that? Well, stop. Hammer time. I hope that maybe one or two of you actually thought hammer time after the stop, because I'm not just randomly throwing out things here. I am trying to prove a point. And the point is that this is how the brain works. Quick firing, reacting to that very good song that you know the lyrics to, or whatever that might be. So with this in mind, you gotta start figuring out like how the brain works. Okay, so we know that we are fast reacting, and we know that this is a brilliant thing that we do, but at the end of the day, our brains are dangerous as in pattern building, problem solving machines. And that's what they do. They don't want to think too deeply or too much or in any direction. They want to continue with what they know, because that's how we have trained our brains, right? So essentially, our brains are pretty lazy. And this is something that we should keep in mind. So I think there's also a few other things that we should know before we kind of can start to break things down and how to enable thinking in a better environment, right? So first of all, if you read Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, it's a good read. He's describing our brains having two systems, so system 1 and system 2, where system 1 is our fast thinking, effortless, reacting thinking. So this is where you would, essentially anything that pops up. So the song track, for example, system 1. You don't have to go into system 2, which is then your deep thinking, your problem solving, your kind of figuring things out, where you do hard math or you're really trying to figure out what to do next. So these two systems, they are also sharing one kind of pot of attention that we have. And this is something that's also important because it takes effort to think, right? So if you have this pot where you're able to think either fast and or slow, you cannot do both. So essentially, walking down the street, trying to solve a really hard math problem sometimes makes you stop. So we know that thinking takes effort. We also know that stress makes you think safe, think in the kind of patterns that you normally do. So then you add on stress to this environment where we're supposed to be thinking because we need to make quick decisions. Essentially, we're just painting ourselves a more narrow path where we want to be thinking in. So we're not opening up, we're not being creative. And our brains are so good at jumping to conclusions and at assuming things that we're completely focused on the things that we know. So our brains are kind of dumb in that matter, because if we don't get time to think, we just end up where we just look at this little path, and our brain works really well here, really fast, and all of these things, but never really coming to beyond that first reactive thinking. And you can start seeing patterns in terms of how a company builds product and how they innovate, where we could, for example, see that we're not listening properly. We're not listening to our customers. We never really take the time to do anything like this because we're so focused on the solutions that we already have in our head. Which also leads to kind of feature factories, because we're actually never really thinking beyond what that solution that we had in mind. So we're just, instead of building something, we're just building new things on top of things instead of maybe remove or reuse or, I don't know, do something else. We also end up with very low quality data because we don't think about what data we need and why. We start to collect everything, and then GDPR comes and we disregard everything, and then we end up with poor measured KPIs because we're not really sure what truth we are after. So the data quality is usually quite bad. Tech debt, I'm going to say unnecessary tech debt. I think that a lot of this, when we have this reactive thinking, we build MVPs that we potentially never rewrite and do something else with, and we kind of never getting to the bottom of the problem, because essentially we're focusing on the solution. We're not focusing on the problems. Our brains get tunnel vision because it's stressful and because it takes effort to think, and because we start to assume things. And these solution focus then really, really limits the innovation that we have together. And I also want to mention that an environment like this also creates quite a lot of stress on the individuals, which then leads to high burnout and high retention, because people need time to think. We need to slow down. Stop. Different stop, same thought. don't know what happened in your brain. But this is the different one. It's in the name of love with these beautiful ladies. The point here is that our brain works faster sometimes than we need it to do. So, how can we make better use of our time, our brains, and our colleagues, essentially? How can we unblock thinking? And how can we really move past the stress and the assumptions that we have in our brain because we're stuck in this little box of our thinking? Well, there's a lot of hats that we wear as a product manager. I hate this expression, but in this example that I'm giving, I cannot figure out a better way to do it, so I'm just going to say we need another hat. We need another hat, and we need a hat as a thinking facilitator. We need to help other people do their best thinking. Because as a product manager, a lot of our job is to be thinking, right? We need to think about how to solve things. And we do not think alone. Foolish to think that we would be thinking alone. We need to think with other people, so we're dependent on other people to do their best thinking. We need our developers to think beyond that easy solution and think about the best solution. We need our customers to think without assumptions around what they believe that we might want to hear when we conduct interviews. And we need our peers and our stakeholders to be able to team up with us to think about what we are supposed to do next. What is the problems that we're trying to solve? So all of this is super duper important for us to be able to do this. And if we're able to be thinking facilitator, we need to be able to create this type of environment where people can think, right? So how do we essentially then think better? Well, if we look at it from the perspective that I've given before, we know that reducing stress helps you think better. We know that redirecting your focus to think outside of the patterns that you're already in helps you think better. And we also know that removing assumptions will help you think better. In Nancy Klein's book, she is writing about how to create this thinking environment. So the book is called Time to Think. I can recommend it tremendously. And this thinking environment in what she's writing about needs to have 10 components. I will not talk about them in depth today, but I will kind of focus on these 3 points and also sum it up with the points that she has. And then I would also present to you the format as in how we can do this to how we have this meeting form, so to say. So the thinking environment is really brilliant. I've tried it and it works. It really sparks engagement and it sparks a different way of thinking and engagement together. So first things first, there's 3 rules to a thinking environment, and I think they sum it up pretty good. Everybody gets the chance to speak, no interruptions. We focus on the good things first, and then the challenge. And we find and remove assumptions together. So let's take it one step back, because I want to go dig into a little bit what it means to reduce stress in a meeting form. I mean, it means a lot of things, but essentially coming into that meeting, that place, that is it a virtual one or if it's in the real life, so to say, we want to make sure that everybody has the right information, and also they know why just they are there and what the reason is for it. So having a goal, having the right invite list, and then making sure that everybody has the right information coming into the meeting so that they can participate. And then we're looking at everybody get a chance to speak, right? And this is then equal time to speak for everybody, which means essentially that we're all equals. From intern to CPO, everybody in the meeting are there for a reason. And we listen with attention. You might remember this from the beginning, the attention. So we listen without trying to figure out what is coming next, but we also listen without interruptions. In a meeting where there's feelings coming up, this should be able to be ventilated, because emotions also helps us unblock thinking, and we come to an ease, which is what happens when we have the time to actually express these things. So all of these things in place. makes us reduce the stress, which also makes us think better at the end of the day. Second point, redirecting focus. Well, essentially, we redirect focus by listening to other people and really listen, because we all come into a meeting with our own agenda, with our own assumptions, with our own thoughts. And then when we start to listening to others fully, we start to see the diversity in how other people think, which then is redirecting our focus. We are showing appreciation in this meeting, and I think this is something that we do not do enough. She speaks, Nancy Klein that is, about a ratio of 5-1, appreciation versus criticism. I think this is probably one of the better solutions that we have to showing appreciation, and I think that we should get a lot better at it, not just in the product or tech environment, but as humans. And then at the end of the day, we will also encourage more thinking. And as a facilitator, you do this quite easily, because when someone seems to be coming to the end of their train of thoughts, you simply ask if there is more. And by doing so, I can tell you it's really cool, because there's always more. Not always, but most of the time. So much more coming when you're allowed to finish your thinking, when you're allowed to move past that first reactive thinking, when you're allowed to move past your assumption, and all of these things. There's really something coming around here. And one final point here, and what needs to be there, and I want to explain this a little bit as well, because this is the removing of assumptions. We do this with something that she called incisive questions. The formula for this is pretty simple. So you're trying to identify what the assumptions are. What are we assuming here? And then you look at it as, you try to remove it. So you say, okay, but if my assumptions are wrong, how would I actually go about it? Let me give you an example here. So let's say that our engagement has dropped on the landing page. We're sitting a few people in a room. We don't have proof of what it is, so we don't know. But we need to quickly come up with a solution because engagement is dropping. 2 people comes into this room and they are sure it's a new banner, 100%. They must be. And 2 people comes in and say, well, it's probably the button color because we changed that recently. There's no proof of anything, but these people come into this meeting assuming 2 different things, with different already thought about solutions: remove the banner, change the color of the button, whatever. So they come into the meeting with very different opinions and very different scopes, and they have kind of tunnel vision in what they believe is the truth here. So we would ask them, okay, well, what if you knew that it's not the button that's the problem? This person then starts to think differently. And this is what we're trying to do. It might be the button, but we haven't got to that yet, right? So, looking at it now, we reduce stress, we redirect focus, we remove assumptions, and then there's a format to this. So all of this comes together in this format. The format is simple, and it's engaging, and usually, the times I've tried it, has come up with really cool ideas at the end of it. So remember the rules as well, that everybody gets a chance to talk, equal amount, and we listen without interruption, all of these things. So what we do is the first round is always positive. Everybody gets the equal time to speak, no interruptions, but we started it positive. And why would we do that? Well, we do that because we want to redirect our focus as well. We come in to solve a problem, we have assumptions, we have thoughts, and we're narrow-minded. We want to be able to open up. So what happens when we start, back to the landing page here, what happens when we start to talk about this landing page in a positive way? When was it good? What was good about it? Can we bring up some good feedback from customers, etc., etc.? Is that we start to open up also to different solutions to the problem that we thought we had already figured out. So we do this one round, everybody gets a chance to speak, equal time. Second round, same rule set, and then everybody brings up the problem solving kind of ideation, ideas, thoughts about what is actually the problem here. So here is where the button people and the banner people would bring up their thoughts. And they're like, the banner is a problem, the button is the problem. And then we start to remove the assumptions. So let's say that this banner was actually never released. We had a branch problem, we couldn't release it. The banner people are completely wrong here because it wasn't even released, but they were so caught up in their way of thinking that they didn't even know this, or they didn't pay attention because they thought about this as the solution. So what we do is that we try to remove all of these assumptions in this meeting. Usually we would write them down to kind of identify them, and then we talk about the ones that we can start to quickly remove, and then some of them might be more complicated. So this is the discussion. And then in this discussion, we will also come up with new solution, new ideas, new thoughts. All right, well, if it's not the banner, maybe it's because we didn't release the banner that the engagement has dropped. I don't know. Hopefully we come to a decision. We can do another round if needed. But then at the end of it, we always end on a positive note. So we want to kind of sum up the result of the meeting in one positive feedback round as well. Pretty simple. And you might think now, does it work? Well, if you want an environment, a meeting environment where people are thinking freely, being creative, and coming up with new solutions, it definitely works. It does. It's really cool, and it does work. I've tried it out from one-on-ones, which is a different type of setup. We can read about it in the book. We don't have time to talk about it today, but also all the way to a strategy meeting for 2022. I did just last week in this type of environment, and it's really, really cool. So one thing that you might think is that does it take long, because it sounds like everybody's going to talk. Well, I have two things to say about this. First thing is, if you usually have people who do not participate in your meeting, maybe they can get an email. You should have people that participate. It doesn't make any sense to have anybody else there. And then secondly, what happens when we allow the brain to think is that it actually starts to think faster, because you're not jumping to conclusion or stressing past things because you know that you're going to get interrupted. You start to relax and you start to think freely. And there's a few other things that we see happening in an environment where this is kind of embedded. So free thinking is embedded somehow. We see a culture change because people feel valued in the meetings. They know why they come to the meeting, and they are allowed to speak, and they are being listened to. We also learn how to listen because we start to listen without trying to figure out what's coming next. And we also really try to listen fully without adding our own storyline to what other people are saying. I mean, active listening. You all heard it, I hope. This then brings up innovations and new ideas because we essentially start to focus on the right things, because we're not distracted, and we're opening up and we're redirecting our focus. So at the end of the day, we just finally get some time to think. That is all for me today. Thank you very much for listening. I would love to hear more about how you get time to think and how it is working for you, or how to set up a thinking environment. Feel free to reach out. I'm on LinkedIn. I just released my website. Super excited. And until next time, here's some reading things I think we should all go through. And I can tell you that I'm right on time. So you had a 24-minute thinking break. And I'm hoping that it gives you some more insights on how you can redirect your own thinking and inspire other people to think better. Thank you very much.